First, thank you for your time tonight. I went up to Eddie on Sunday last week and said, hey, there's a lesson that I really feel compelled to give, but I know the schedule's full this year. And he's like, actually, how about in 6 days? And I was like, okay. So I am equal parts excited and nervous, and I've tried to parse everything down as much as I can to a couple main points that I want to get out of this evening with you all. So what kind of compelled this study was I've spent a lot of the last year looking at grief and pain and sorrow, which are your three words this evening, but I'll get to that in a second, for obvious or maybe not so obvious reasons. And so what I'm going to share with you tonight has deeply moved me. And I want to share that with you because what we discussed tonight is connected like a thread through almost every other story of the Bible and through so many stories of people sitting here today. So I felt it was very relevant. So a couple particular insights that I want to share with you. They're really relatively simple. They're just not very well known, but they are very significant. I was going to put in a little statistics joke here for one of my friends sitting in the back, that P is less than or equal to 0.05, but apparently that's not a thing anymore. He'll get it. So I will likely get emotional as I talk about it, but you know me, I kind of do that anyway. The weird thing about this is that the comfort that I've received from this is not like an encouraging kind of comfort, which I hope you will understand as we go through this. It's more of a validating kind of comfort. It's really odd the way it feels. It's just to say that, yes, what you are feeling and the way you have seen life go for yourself and for people very close to you and for strangers and for people all across the world, yeah, it makes sense. You're not crazy for feeling that way and feeling that way so strongly. It's really emphasized to me that the Lord is a tender and loving God, a gracious creator, and even in judgment, he moves towards his people. He always is reaching forward to us, but it's us that pull away. So tonight, our three words are grief, sorrow, and pain. If you've got your notebooks, can I see those? Very good. Grief, sorrow, and pain. That'll be the theme, however cheerful that may be. So I want to kind of preload your brain with the scriptures that we're going to be reading because I'm a teacher and I can't not do that because I know it works really well. So what do you recall of Genesis 3:16 and 17? Don't look it up yet. Just pull it up in your head. What do you remember about it? Right? Because you don't always have your Bible right there with you. Actually, you kind of do with your phone. But what do you remember it's to say? And with what you remember it saying, what does it say about woman? And what does it say about man? And how does that make you feel? I think that's kind of important as we go forward. I know that it's going to stir up some feelings and some emotions. It can't not. I know that's kind of a naughty word sometimes. When we're talking about the way that we understand things, we like to keep emotions kind of as a backup to reason and logic. but God gave them to us also. And the Hebrew people were a deeply feeling people. I don't know if you've read any of David's Psalms. He was a very emotional person. So when you think about Genesis 3:16 and 17, and what it says about woman, and what it says about man, if you can recall that, what does it tell you about the character of God? Because he's the one who said it. Okay? Is it a punishment? Is it a curse? What do you remember? With that being said, let's jump right in. If I were to summarize the first 2 pages of your Bible to this point, I would say something like, God created everything. There was chaos. He brought order and separation and beauty. And everything was very good. Very good. God blessed his creation. He blessed Adam and Eve and said, be fruitful and multiply. A blessing. Be fruitful and multiply. Shortly after, the craftiest animal of the field, the serpent, deceived Eve, and Adam went along with it. Their eyes were opened. They were naked. God said, where are you? And they were like, we've hidden ourselves because we're scared and naked and ashamed. We've removed ourselves from your ability to see us, and it's their fault. So now what? So if you want to turn to Genesis 3, we're going to pick up in verse 14. Then the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all the livestock, and more than any animal of the field. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will make enemies of you and the woman, and of your offspring and her descendant. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. And we'll just skip that one too. And to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you shall deliver children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it, cursed is the ground because of you. With hard labor you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, yet you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Okay? So 3:16 and 17. What did God say to the woman? God made childbirth even more painful. So painful, he said it twice. I think that's pretty clear, right? I'm reading from, all my scriptures up here are from the New American Standard. I generally read from the ESV or the Holman Christian Standard. They all say essentially the same thing. The King James Version, I know some of you are very keen to that one. I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. I will intensify your labor pains. You will bear children in anguish. I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. This one is called the Amplified Classic Edition. It's useful because it'll take some of the original words and give you kind of a thesaurus. So it'll give you multiple synonyms of that word to give some broader understanding. This one reads, I will greatly multiply your grief and your suffering in pregnancy and the pangs of childbearing. With spasms of distress you will bring forth children. Having only witnessed labor a couple times, I can attest to those spasms of distress. Only secondhand knowledge, however. So our English translations make it pretty clear what the Lord has done, right? Oops, sorry, can't do that. But this is what I want to talk to you about. So I ask that you kind of bear with me. We're going to dig into a couple Hebrew words, and I think it's going to be really interesting. It's going to make things make a lot more sense, I hope. So from what I've gleaned from listening to people, from listening to other women, listening to other men within the church, and people who have said, you know what, the Lord is not for me because of this right here. I've heard people say, what kind of God does this? Increases the pain and tortures and punishes woman when he blessed her to multiply. Or, so you're saying, God said, I as a woman have to endure life-threatening labor, potentially lose my child, but the man just has some hard days at work. Have you heard that? Maybe thought that somewhere for a minute? Or as a man, I have to work hard every single day of my life, but my wife just has a couple days of labor. If you have thought that, don't tell her you have. But I think also interestingly, I've heard this one several times more recently just because we're at this kind of stage in our life. Am I cheating the Lord by getting an epidural and not experiencing pain in childbirth? Like, am I sinning? Because that's what God said should happen, and I'm doing something to make sure it doesn't happen. Maybe you haven't thought that. My brain's I've got hit in the head a lot as a kid. It does things differently. So, those are real concerns. Right? Like, who wants to endure that pain? Man, who wants to work by the sweat of your brow and, go through this hard labor every single day of your life? I would prefer not to. I don't have that choice. This is where we are. So I'm not going to actually answer any of those things that I just brought up. That's for you to do. But I do think some of the things that we discussed tonight might help answer some of those things. So you'll notice the fun characters at the top of the screen. We're going to go into some Hebrew. So if we read Genesis 3:16 with a couple Hebrew words in the way, it would read like this. To the woman he said, I will greatly multiply Itzabon in Herion. In pain you shall deliver children, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Those two words are kind of going to be what we look at the most tonight. What is Itzabon? That's going to be most of our focus. And then what is Herion? An easier answer. So first, I want to give a little caveat disclaimer. The Bible you're reading is put together by people who have studied these languages for decades. They get together with other people who have studied them for decades. They do their translations. They're reviewed by other people who are very well versed in these other languages. And then they vote on tricky interpretations. Because the act of translation is an interpretation. We're not fluent in that original language. We're not in that time anymore. We're not in that culture anymore. So there's just going to be some interpretation that's involved. We also kind of understand that there's going to be some tradition involved in translation. Like, for example, your Bible was probably translated within the last decade or two, if you have a newer version. If you have a King James, that's about 400 years ago. But Mark 16:16 says, baptize. But we all know, that's not a word It was just transliterated from the Greek. It should be immerse. We all know that, but we keep baptize. Why? Just tradition. So maybe that's kind of what's happening here. The tradition of translating it the way that we have it in English consistently through all of our English translations is that? I'm not sure. But I can say this. Itzubon is the same word for hard labor in Genesis 3:17. But in 3:17 it's translated hard labor, or in some versions, toil. Different word. Different English word, right? Just the next verse. And then herion, it has a root word, hara, which every place in the Bible, aside from this one verse, is translated conception, to conceive. And we'll look at those. Every single place. I think it's like 62 times it's in the Bible. Most of those in Genesis. This person conceived and then bore a child. It's always used separately from to bear a child. So I will greatly multiply itzubon in herion. It is simple. It doesn't have anything to do with the delivery of a child. And I'll try to make that a little bit more clear, but that's where I'm coming from on this. I'm not saying that there won't be pain in childbirth, because that's the next part. In pain you shall deliver children. That part is that. But this first part, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. Because whatever's going on here, I think it's important to understand that I don't think God is punishing people, punishing Adam and Eve in Genesis 3. God is a creator of order and beauty. In the garden, they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they withdrew themselves from the Lord. They hid themselves. And so God said, you can't stay here. So he put them out of the garden. They're now separate from God's order. They're now in the chaotic parts of creation. So if it's not in the presence of God in the garden, where there is his order and his power and his beauty and his peace and his goodness and his love and his mercy, what's left? Pain, distress, anxiety, sorrow, death. That's what happens when we're not in the presence of the Lord. I think that makes sense. So let's look at where this word is used more. We're going to look at not every single usage of this because there are very many. Itzubon has a root in Hebrew that's also used in the next little phrase in Genesis 3:16 where it says, in pain you shall deliver children. It comes from atzav, which is just the noun for pain. And then it has a couple different little variations, kind of how we would use pain, pains, painting, things like that. But itzubon comes from that in Strong's. So as we go through, just read with me. It's the same word. Then to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying you shall not eat from it, cursed is the ground because of you. With itzubon you shall eat from it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you, yet you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, until you return to the ground, because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. It's the same word. I think God's describing for the woman and for the man, this is what life's going to be like for the both of you. Let's continue. Genesis 6:6. So the Lord was sorry that he had made mankind on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. That's the root atzav. He was in pain in his heart. What's going on in Genesis 6:6? The thought of every man was evil continually, and God wiped the slate clean. I don't think this was just a physical pain. He was deeply hurt in sorrow, in grief. Psalm 147:3. God, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their atzav, binds up their pain, the itzubon. He binds up their wounds. Okay. 1 Samuel 20:34. Then Jonathan got up from the table in the heat of anger and did not eat food on the second day of the new moon, because he was atzav about David, since his father had insulted him. And then David says the same thing to Jonathan. Your dad's not going to tell you that he wants to kill me because he knows it's going to atzav you. You remember the relationship that Jonathan and David had? They loved each other as their own soul. When I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I feel like it's appropriate in the moment. When you think about your children, and you think about the hardship or the pain or the suffering they might endure, are you atzav for them? Are you worried? Are you grieved? Are you in pain? David was. So the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the people, because the people heard it said that day, the king is in atzav over his son. This is when Absalom was killed. Hooray! The traitor is dead. Kill that guy. Because the king is in mourning, because his son, even though he was a traitor, was killed. He was atzav. I don't think 3:16, the first part, itzabon in herion, pain in childbearing, is the best English that we got. I think we have better words. In mourning, in pain, in grief, you will conceive children. You will raise children. You will bear them up. We're going to look at more. Isaiah 54:6. For the Lord has called you like a wife forsaken and atzaved in spirit, even like a wife of one's youth when she is rejected, says your God. Do you know anybody who might have been abandoned by their spouse, left out to dry with no explanation, just in pain and sorrow? I think you do. They are atzav in spirit. Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but an atzav word stirs up anger. A word of pain, of grief, of sorrow, of mourning, of distress, stirs up anger. Okay. Get my screen back on over here. And then quickly, I could have filled the screen with just the references for herion, the root word hara, but I won't because that was too much space. I think you'll get the point. Because we'll just look at two, and if you want to, that's the Strong's word, the number, 2032, and then the root is the other one. If you'd like to dig into that, I will give you all that information. I have it, because I like doing this kind of thing. So in Ruth 4:13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. He had relations with her, and the Lord enabled her to herion. And she gave birth to a son. It's a different word. The Hebrew language has a pretty developed, sophisticated vocabulary for delivery of a child and for labor pains. Those aren't these words in any of the scriptures that I've shown you, or in Genesis 3:16 and 17. Those aren't those words. They have different words for those. Genesis 4:1. It's the next spot that we see that word right after Genesis 3:16, 17. Now the man had relations with his wife, Eve, and she, hara. She conceived a child and then gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have obtained a male child with the help of the Lord. So I think it's pretty clear that In Genesis 3:16 through 19, when God is talking to the woman and he's talking to the man, he's telling them something bigger than that happy moment of childbirth that's also equal parts terrifying and painful. And to the man, you're going to have some hard days. I know for a lot of us, especially in this time in the world, barring the economy and inflation and all those other things, if you want to talk about that, I don't know many of us that in hard labor by the sweat of our brow earn a living. A lot of us work from home, pretty cush. Or we commute to work in a fairly reliable vehicle, sit down all day. I would say that it's work. I don't know if it's hard labor. If you've talked to farmers or ranchers, people who are literally in fields doing things every day and dealing with the different, like I was looking at something the other day, they just really brought it all pretty clear. Just the different regulations that the government puts on farmers and all the different things they have to do to just grow a crop or to raise cattle, and then they end up with zero profit. Like they work sun up to sundown for nothing. Literally nothing. Most of them. I don't know how many farmers you know. They just don't really exist anymore because it just doesn't provide anymore. Like that's hard work. Day laborers. I know the Aguirres, Brian's business that he does, that's hard work. I can't do that. I would fall down and end up where I work. I don't want to do that. So, is your perspective changing a little bit from where we started? What you thought Genesis 3:16 said to the woman? It's not just about pain in childbirth. It's something much bigger. I've got two, pardon me, I know it's against the rules of PowerPoint to have a big quote on the screen, but I'm going to put it up there anyway. It's from two Hebrew scholars, and they're known for being scholars of Hebrew. One is from Ian Provon, and he says, the word etzev, which is the root of itzabon, is used of emotional pain and the pain involved in work. It can also be used of a more generalized kind of pain. It is never used elsewhere in the Old Testament, however, to refer to labor pains or birth pangs. Conversely, there is a well-established vocabulary which is routinely used for labor pain, sarar, chebel, and hul. If we take our lead from the meaning of etzev elsewhere in the Old Testament, which I think is reasonable to do, Genesis 3:16 refers to the agony, hardship, worry, anxiety of the circumstances in which children are conceived, born, raised, and in which they die. This is the same word's clear meaning in the next verse when it's describing the man's work in the field. Another quote from John Walton. So this word would include the anxiety about whether she will be able to conceive a child or not, which was a major status issue in the biblical world. We'll look at several examples of that. Go ahead and start thinking of them. I'm sure you can come up with one on almost every page of Genesis. The anxiety that comes with all the physical discomfort of pregnancy, the anxiety concerning the health of the child in the womb, and the anxiety about whether she and the baby will survive the birth process. In all of these, we must agree that anxiety defines the birth process. Even in a world of modern technology, where's our L&D nurse? I think she's back there now. And much more so in an uncertain medical climate of the ancient world. The resulting paraphrase would be, I will greatly increase the anguish you will experience in the birth process, from the anxiety surrounding conception to the strenuous work of giving birth. It's not an additional penalty. he, God, is indicating some of the implications to the penalty of death that he's about to impose. So, if you'll allow me, I'm just going to take his suggested translation and put that back into our verse. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase the anguish you will experience in the birth process, from the anxieties surrounding conception to the strenuous work of giving birth. Yet your desire will be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. I'm sorry that you're in your first one. But I know there are people here who have struggled for years on the conception side, who've been able to conceive but haven't been able to maintain pregnancy, or who have been able to maintain pregnancy but then lose the child shortly after, or who maintain the pregnancy, have a healthy child, but that child is born into a contentious and jealous and dangerous and rivalrous situation, and the child leaves the Lord. Itzubah, grief, sorrow, mourning, despair. So now what? So I feel like it's painfully obvious that this is the reality that we all live in, right? I feel that once we've understood what the Hebrew meant, and I'm so jealous of people who know Hebrew, because they don't have to go through this process. They read it and they're like, yeah, that's what that says. You don't understand that? I'm like, no, I don't. I'm sorry. It's just a translation issue. Like, I don't speak your language. I need your help. But it plays out exactly the way that God describes it in Genesis 3, the next page over, with Cain and Abel. Right? What happens to Cain and Abel? Spoiler, Abel gets murdered by his brother. Adam and Eve have born children into this chaotic world where people choose good and evil for themselves. And Cain thought it was better for him to murder his brother because he didn't have to deal with the pain of looking at his brother getting more favor than he thought he deserved. Right? And then another interesting translation, or instance of the word Itzabon. Lamech named his son Noah because of Itzabon. Because they said that this is the one that will bring relief from the painful toil, from the ground that has been cursed. The painful toil, Itzabon. That's why they named him Noah. He will relieve us from this. And he did. Maybe not in the way they expected, but he did. Turn over to Genesis 12 real quick. I think this is another relevant demonstration of what we're talking about here. Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 12. The Lord said, be fruitful and multiply, right? Be fruitful, multiply. Well, what happens to Abraham as soon as he gets into the land? In verse 10, now there was a famine. Well, I don't know if you've tried to grow anything during a famine, but you can't. There's nothing there. So how are you going to be fruitful, Abraham? What are you going to do? You going to figure this out for yourself? What are you going to do? Well, it looks like he did. Instead of trusting the Lord, I don't know, he didn't stay there. Abraham went over to Egypt. And then when he got there, what did he do to his wife? Did he stand up for her? Did he put himself in her place and protect her? He said, could you just say that you're my sister, please? I don't want them to murder me. Put her at risk of being raped to save his life. I don't think that's what he was supposed to have done. He chose good and evil for himself. And then Genesis 15 with Sarah. Right? You probably know where I'm going with this part. And multiply. Was Sarah able to multiply? No, she was barren. I'm sure there was a lot of utsav about that, being not able to produce. But then your husband gets a promise. He's going to have children, lots of children. But I'm barren. I've got an idea. Here, take my slave. It'll work. It'll do it. Did Sarah trust the Lord? No, she came up with her own way. How did that work out? If you read the next couple chapters, there's bitterness and jealousy and hatefulness, and drives out Hagar and the firstborn son of Abraham. It's not good. Yitzabon. Grief, sorrow, pain. It's not just childbirth. It's the whole life of a child. And then not long after that, Jacob and Esau, they had a very healthy, loving parental environment. Nope, they didn't actually. Right? From the very beginning, each parent had a favorite, and they played them against each other. Right? Today in Bible class, for the little ones, they learned about the stew that Jacob used to steal Esau's birthright. And then eventually Jacob steals Esau's blessing. It was all his own idea. He didn't have any help at all. Actually, his mom said, let's do it this way. Again, people choosing for themselves good and evil. God is using that. He's not doing it to people. He's using it. He's still able to make those things work. But that's not the way he made it from the beginning. Right? God isn't saying, I'm going to make your life miserable so that you learn that you need to love me because I'm the Lord and I'm punishing you now. I see people being terrible to each other. And the Lord's saying, if you will draw near to me, I can make this work. I can comfort you. I can make you be fruitful and multiply. If you do it your way, Yitzabon. I think the most interesting one is, go to Genesis 30 real quick. This one I think is just the most glaring one of all. Be fruitful and multiply, right? Well, Jacob, the deceiver, gets deceived, ends up with women. Oh, my wife just told me I'm talking too much. I'm sorry. I'll go faster. But in Genesis 30, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she was barren, the Lord using this to test Rachel. Will you be faithful to me, Rachel? Will you trust me in my process, or are you going to do it your way? Well, what does Rachel say? She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. She was not melodramatic. She really felt that. She's like, Jacob, you are withholding from me. It's you who's supposed to make me be fruitful. Make it happen. And then Jacob, with some wisdom and anger, in the next verse says, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? And then Rachel's solution is like, well, here, take my servant. I don't know if you remember the next part of the story. They tried to kill their brother. And one of the other verses that I could have put up here for Atsav is whenever the brothers find out about their sister Dinah. They were Atsav about her being raped. Right? Itzubon. I'll move more quickly. So as I studied this, it was like a giant light bulb went off. And I saw all these connections to everything else in the Bible, as we've just looked through here, just in Genesis. And then my own life with my 2 girls, with my little boy, and then being pregnant again with another boy, and then thinking about what the world has in store for my girls. Am I going to be able to protect her from people just being mean? Or like just don't be mean to them. Am I going to be able to protect her from that? No, I won't. Or what about a boy who breaks her heart? Murderous rage. Right? Or even more, Itzabon, some man who thinks that what she has is his without her offering it, and he takes it from her. Like is all too common. That's Itzabon. Pain, sorrow, and grief surrounding the entire process of childbearing, conception, delivery, pregnancy, rearing them into the world that is chaotic and evil and full of people doing things the way they want to do, not following the way of the Lord. Oh, I got to skip some of these other points, I promise. I'm sorry. But this is where we're going, okay? So did God punish us in this? No, I don't think he did. I don't think that's a tenable perspective to maintain when you see the way the Lord practices judgment throughout the rest of the Bible. It's almost always just natural consequences. You've made this choice, well, this is what's going to happen now. And I'm going to use that to continue my story. Because I think it's important that we understand that God isn't being coercive. He isn't being vindictive or malicious, malevolent, capricious, arbitrary. Like, he isn't just coming up with circumstances and consequences for your sin. He's saying, these are the consequences of your choices. You've chosen to make good and evil for yourself. That's what that's going to be. I am still the Lord. I'm still here. I want to help you. I have made ways for that to happen. Come to me. And this was really interesting to me, and then we'll move on. In the garden, when the Lord comes back in and he says, "Where are you?" That's actually one Hebrew word. It's not 3. It's one Hebrew word with 2 letters, and it's I, which has the same kind of root word as the beginning word of the book of Lamentations, which I think is interesting. The Lord didn't come in and say, you done messed up, guys. He says, where? Where are you? He's concerned and grieved for his children, for his creation. He's not trying to go out and punish them because they broke the one rule. He is distressed. And I think it's just so obvious. So what do we do? I'll move quickly through these because it's the main point, and I think we all know these parts pretty well. 2 Corinthians 1:3-4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the Father of mercies, and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our affliction, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves have been comforted by God. He doesn't leave you out to dry. He comforts you. He shows you, no, that's not the way the world was supposed to be. So Jesus said in Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden or burdened, and I will give you rest, and take my yoke upon you and learn from me," which is what they were supposed to do in the garden. Learn from the Lord. Don't make good and evil for yourself. Learn from me. And you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is comfortable and my burden is light. Psalm 71, "You who have made me see many troubles and calamities will revive me again. From the depths of the earth you will bring me up again, and you will increase my greatness and comfort me again." And then in Revelation 21, this vision that John had, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is among the people, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be among them, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will be no longer any mourning or crying or pain, for those first things have passed away." And he who sits on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." And he said, "Write, for these words are faithful and true." Then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give water to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. The one who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." And the last one, Revelation 22, 3-7. I realize that color didn't turn out great. "There will no longer be any curse." Genesis 3. What was cursed? The serpent and the ground were cursed. Man and woman were not. The environment which man and woman lived in was cursed. There will no longer be any curse, and the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his bondservants will serve him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads, and there will no longer be any night, and they will not have need of light or of lamp, nor the light of the sun, because the Lord God will illuminate them, and they will reign forever and ever. And he said to me, "These words are faithful and true. And the Lord, the God of the spirits and the prophets, sent his angel to show his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book." So, life after Eden was Itzibon for the man and woman for a time. But there is promise. And I pray you have found comfort in understanding that the Lord from the beginning has made promise to take away your Itzibon and return us to a new type of Eden, a place where there is no pain, no sorrow, no death, no loss, no fear. All we have to do is surrender our will to him and choose his ways, his good and evil. If we can pray for you, if we can help you take any of those steps, please come forward and stand and sing with us.